I now call on Ruth Davidson to speak to and move the amendment in her name.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First, let me say that I welcome this debate today, not because it's an issue which is easy to discuss in public, something so appalling never is, but because it is only right that issues of difficulty and of passion like this are debated in our Parliament here in Edinburgh. And I would like to begin on a note of consensus. As politicians, I suspect that we all know survivors of rape. Indeed, I know that there are even those among us here who have been subject to sexual violence ourselves and who find the issue and even the word difficult to articulate. And in the last 2 weeks, as this debate has emerged into the public domain, I know that many of us, me included, have spoken to women who are recovering from their ordeal. We know the awful circumstances that they face. Not just the terror of the attack or attacks themselves, but also the indignity of the criminal justice system that makes them and that faces them if they report the crime. The prospect of a protracted court case that follows. The criminal injuries compensation process. And then the lengthy spell afterwards where women, and in some cases men too who've been attacked, have to try to pick up the broken pieces of their lives and confront the world anew. And in the last few weeks, when we've talked about how we should help women in such circumstances, we've used words like sensitive and compassionate. And I agree that these words don't even begin to cut it. They shrivel next to the enormity of the violation that they have suffered. And that is even more so when we face women whose rape has resulted in the birth of a child. Perhaps we don't have the words for it at all, and certainly I struggle to find them. And, Presiding Officer, I'd like to use my speech here today to try and place this issue in context. The issue of the so-called rape clause arose as a result of the welfare bill passed in the House of Commons in 2015. And these changes to welfare spending were introduced in the wake of the 2015 general election, when my party set out its manifesto a clear plan to try and put the UK's public finances back on solid ground. We all know that the UK continues to spend more than it can afford, last year borrowing to the tune of £69 billion. It is the view of these benches that in order to restore public finances, we must eliminate that deficit and then reduce the debt mountain that we as a country has allowed to build up over a period of years. Otherwise, future generations will have to pay our debts. I'm sorry, I have a lot to get through and I won't be taking any interventions. I also don't think that this issue is one that should be subject to the knockabout that we see and hear daily. Now, this, of course, is a political judgment that any government has to take. Labour and the SNP would not seek to curtail the growth in spending as we would, and that is their right. But it is our judgment that we need to reduce this deficit in order to demonstrate that the UK can withstand any future shocks that may come our way and can build an economy which continues to sustain our public services. And this inevitably means examining many budgets, and the welfare budget is included in that. And it has meant, for example, removing child benefit from higher earners. But the issue that we are debating today revolves around the further decisions taken by the UK Government to limit child tax credits to the first 2 children. Now, it is worth stressing that this will not apply to existing claimants. In other words, parents of 3 or more children currently claiming tax credits will still continue to do so. But I accept that for many MSPs here, this change is far from welcome. And let me say that these are difficult judgment calls. When in 2015 the UK Government initially proposed cutting tax credits, I spoke out against them. I didn't think the ministers had got the balance right, and those measures were scrapped. However, the 2-child tax limit was not something that I spoke out again. Indeed, nor did others. I recall then the interim leader of the Labour Party, Harriet Harman, also making clear she felt it was something that should be considered. She said, "We're not going to be voting against the welfare bill. We're not going to be opposing the household benefit cap. We're going to be understanding the point about more than 3 children." I agreed with her then, and I still do. And the First Minister gave monetary examples, so let me put them in context. A one-parent family with 2 children, in which the parent works 16 hours a week at the minimum wage, can claim monetary benefits of just under £19,000 a year. Added to salary, and that comes to the equivalent of an earned income of £32,000. And I cite these figures only to give context to the numbers the First Minister gave. This package of reforms was voted through the House of Commons, and I note in passing that many Labour MPs abstained at stage 2 when they did so. And it was then, during the consultation phase, prior to implementation, that the question of exemptions was raised, and it was agreed. For parents of multiple birth, for children who are adopted, and for the rare cases when the birth of a third or subsequent child is the consequence of rape, the UK Government agreed that the two-child restriction should not apply. And I support these exemptions. Indeed, I cannot imagine that there is a single member of this chamber who does not. There may be many who disagree with capping child tax credits at the first two children, but not surely with such exemptions to the cap being put in place. So the question then comes to implementation. And I'm sorry to say that on this issue, too many people have simply not been clear with the facts. I have heard members of this chamber say on television that women must complete an 8-page form in order to receive this exemption. And this is simply not correct. On the detail of how this works, may I quote the Department for Work and Pensions consultation response on this matter, published in January. It says, neither DWP nor HMRC staff will question the claimant about the incident other than to make the claim and receive the supporting evidence from the third-party profession. It adds that women are not placed in the position of having to give details about the rape to DWP or HMRC officials.
Point of order, Mr Findlay.
I was under the impression that this was a debating chamber in this Parliament. And isn't it appalling that we have the leader of the opposition in this Parliament unwilling to take a single intervention to defend one of the most heinous policies that we will ever debate in this Parliament? She should be ashamed of herself.
That is not... That is not a point of order. All members know it is entirely their own discretion whether to take an intervention or not. Ms Davidson.
Thank you. There is absolutely no requirement to either report rape as a crime, to provide proof of rape or proof of conviction. A woman writes her name and a third-party professional who is helping the mother is asked to set out the rest. This third-party model already exists in the benefit system to support victims of domestic violence. The third-party professionals...
Order. Order. The member's not taking an intervention. Ms Davidson.
It is important that we are not willfully misrepresenting the process here, causing fear and alarm. So let me outline it again. Let me outline it to the chamber once again. The woman writes her name and a third-party professional who is helping the mother is asked to set out the rest. And this third-party model already exists in the benefit system to support victims of domestic violence. The third-party professionals, such as healthcare or support workers, are also able to provide or signpost claimants to additional support. Now, the First Minister in her speech talked directly of workability. Citizens Advice Scotland, who have been critical, very critical of the third child restrictions, said the following, and let me quote it.
Another point of order, Ms Freeman.
Order, Presiding Officer. Is it not the case in this debate, in any debate in this chamber, that the facts should be clearly represented? Ms Davidson said that the applicant only had to fill out their name and sign the form. I am reading from that form, page 5 of 8, where the applicant is required to put their name, national insurance number, address, declare that I believe the non-consensual conception applies to my child, give the child's name, sign that, and confirm I am not living with the other parent of this child, even if that other parent was the person that raped the applicant. So accuracy in this debate, above all else, surely is in our standing orders.
Thank you. Thank you. I understand emotions are running high. That was an intervention, not a point of order. Ms Davidson.
I go back and refer to the third-party model and to say that it already exists as relates to domestic violence, and it's the third-party model being used to fill out the pages of this form. But let me come back to the point the First Minister raised directly in her own speech about workability. Now, Citizens Advice Scotland, who I absolutely accept have been critical of the two-child restrictions of this policy, has said this about workability. Citizens Advice Scotland is content with a third-party evidence model being sufficient to enable the exemption to the two-child restriction where it is likely that a child has been conceived as a result of rape. Now, of course, I hear the concerns being raised by other charities in the sector who do not agree with this policy, and I take them seriously. And this is why, in our amendment today, we also say that the implementation of these exemptions must be closely monitored as we go forward. Now, Presiding Officer, I'd like to conclude with 2 points. Firstly, in relation to the First Minister's motion, pointing out the impact of the two-child policy, and I do not dispute the sources she is quoting, but I do ask the Chamber to examine the issue of welfare reform in the round. At the moment, the UK employment rate is the highest on record. In the last year, the number of disabled people in work has increased by nearly 300,000. There are nearly 1.3 million more women employed since 2010. Also, since that time, there are 828 fewer workless households. Income inequality in this country has fallen because the incomes of the lowest paid are rising. The latest ONS data showed that the lowest paid workers are seeing their pay go up by the most, by over 6% last year. Median household disposable income for the poorest fifth rose by £700 last year compared to the richest fifth, whose incomes fell by £1,000. And we're helping people keep more of what they earn. And because of this, the proportion of people living in relative poverty in this country is near its lowest levels since the 1980s. Since 2010, there are 300,000 fewer people across the UK in poverty and 100,000 fewer children in poverty. And across the UK, we continue to spend £90 billion a year on supporting families, people on low incomes and job seekers. This is the record of the UK government on welfare. And our system means that if people across the UK don't support that, then they have the opportunity to ask someone else to do it on the 8th of June. But for this Parliament, the question is deeper, and the question facing us is, what is this Parliament for? Is it to be a soapbox, to sound off against the policies from London that MSPs do not like? Is that what Scottish politics has become? Or, given the enormous powers that this Parliament now has, is it to act? And if there is something that some in this chamber feel is abhorrent or repellent, then surely those words lose all meaning unless there is something behind it. Powers over welfare and the taxation to pay for decisions were demanded and transferred precisely so that devolved Scottish governments could make different choices. I don't believe that any member in this chamber disagrees that women who have children in the very worst of circumstances should be exempted from restrictions on tax credit. I don't want to believe that any member would willfully misrepresent the process, causing fear and alarm. However, I do believe that there are many members of other parties who would wish away tax credits being restricted to the first two children, and I would point them to the legislative powers of this Parliament. For my own part, I will continue to monitor the way in which this works on the ground. And the First Minister and her ministers uses strong words like shameful, and she has the power to act. And if she chooses strong words but chooses not to act, then that would indeed be shameful. So we will continue to monitor this, and I will move the amendment that is in my name.